must say, after having spent 15 years in the industry, that it's still a very labor-intensive and inefficient industry. Big agencies in a market like Singapore have 40 to 50 people in their financial ops team, right? You could automate that layer, right? Go for specific client-side problems. Don't just be myopic and look at advertising and marketing as defined by today. Look at the customer journey.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the $1 Trillion Ads podcast. Here is where we discuss the trends and challenges shaping the advertising industry. Digital ads is going to be a $1 trillion industry by 2028, and we hope to speak to leaders who have shaped this industry to reach here. With me is Prantik Mazumdar, who has been in advertising for the last 12 plus years. He was the face of Happy Marketeer. He sold the company to Merkle and has been very active in the advertising industry, preaching the benefits to different players. He's also an active investor. He's the president of the TIE chapter. He's also a sports enthusiast and a social media junkie, if I were to call him. Welcome, Prantik, to the podcast, and very excited to have you here.
Thanks, Jayesh.
I think you started off to be an engineer. So how did you land up in advertising?
It wasn't obviously a planned agenda, fairly accidental. So I think my journey was, I moved to Singapore in 2001 to study at NUS. As you rightly said, I sort of pursued computer engineering. I started my career with the Singapore government. And I would say that's where broadly industry development, brand marketing, Singapore as a nation brand is very strong. So I started seeing the benefits of building or having a strong brand. I then moved to a private sector, mid-size B2B brand consulting firm, where I got a bit more deeper there, essentially helping brands, especially B2B brands, understand the nuances and merits of differentiation and positioning. And then gradually seeped into the world of advertising through the digital lens when I joined Pinstorm, one of the pioneers in the Indian digital marketing scene, in 2009. I didn't join a big ad agency, but I think bottom up, I joined a digital advertising company. And that obviously gave me an opportunity to work with some legends from the Indian advertising space who had come from the big agencies. So I had to sort of understand their lingo, their thought process. But I think getting through the digital lens was very interesting because fundamentally the tagline of that company went pay for performance, which today probably is passé, but 15 years ago was quite disruptive, I must say, that when everyone else was paying for brand visibility and impressions on TV, radio, or even digital, Pinstorm as a company sort of brought forward the concept saying, as simple as let me give you the clicks and you pay me for the clicks.
Wonderful. I think Pinstorm was really a benchmark for digital advertising when it started. Remember those days, and then you moved to Happy Marketeer.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just look at Singapore and India, broadly speaking, folks who today are, at the top of their digital marketing careers in big agencies or client side, very, very likely at some point in time, either themselves or one degree of separation, their paths cross with someone at Pinstorm. Some of the folks have gone on to build some very good agencies as well, which they've sold to various networks. So Pinstorm was more than an agency, like some sort of an institution, really. And yes, Happy Marketer, again, very fortunate, thanks to my dear friend and classmate Rachit, who's the original founder who started the company in 2009. Rachit sort of basically pushed me saying, hey, you're doing this for someone else. Why don't we do this together? So the company started in 2009, June, but we sort of restructured and I came on board as a partner in November 2011. And, to your point, honestly, Rachit and I, we had no idea what an agency is because we didn't come from that world. We were just folks who knew three things. How do you build a website? How do you drive traffic primarily from Google? And how do you sort of measure it through analytics? So it's only much later did we sort of really understand that, wow, there's this whole ecosystem of agencies and you have the WPPs and the Havases and Dentsus of the world. And we probably were, a tiny speck of dust somewhere in that ecosystem.
Okay, you're being very humble, but given all your experience, you would have spoken to maybe hundreds or 500s of advertisers during your time across Pinstorm, Merkle, and Happy Marketeer. So if I were to look at it from a Asia Pacific standpoint, what would be the top three things that marketeers look for across all these conversations?
I think fundamentally, a lot of the client side folks really struggle to put together a good brief because just to understand what do they need to do or what should they do, I think it's a hard battle. A very tactical approach in the early days saying, hey, can I drive X, can I give you X clicks, what's your traffic, right? Can I help you measure that? But I think over time we realized the bigger challenge at hand was really consultative in nature, to really understand what is their brand all about, who is their target audience, how should they think about them, how should they try and reach out, how should they build a flywheel around their marketing model. Now these things sound quite hefty and buzzwordy, but these genuinely were the big challenges of because all of these marketers on the client side had various KPIs. So one of the biggest one was really what should I tell the customer, how do I break through the clutter, what's that message of positioning and differentiation. Today, even 15 years down the road, when I have some of the conversations, clients do struggle. This is something for us to solve for as well. So, maybe by year 5, year 6 of Happy Marketer, we set up a subsidiary called Future Marketer, which was around consulting and training to really help clients solve for that before they came to Happy Marketer to sort of discuss execution and the tactical element. So that's one. The second is really around metrics. Obviously, every brand wants to, drive higher sales, but you have the classical challenges on the client side where, especially a large client, you have a sales team, a pre-sales team, a marketing team, brand and performance teams. Each one have different sort of KPIs. And I think one of our next big opportunity was to sort of really help them understand what are the different things to measure and what qualitative and quantitative metrics should they look out for, and how does all of that tie into their broader balance scorecard. So I think marketing effectiveness and measurement was again a huge pillar of opportunity for us. So that's the second bucket. The third is, you talked about the $1 trillion ad industry. Bulk of the dollars go into media, right? Whether it's offline or digital, it's ultimately media where you are either sort of giving impressions, clicks. But I think to us, the opportunity also was on all the unsexy below the line opportunity, be it on search engine optimizing, right? Be it on email marketing, marketing automation. So I think what we sort of started telling our customers is, hey, look, once you've got the brand message figured out, once you've got the dashboards and metrics figured out, if you have the paid media dollars, by all means, let's judiciously spend that. Let's get the right audience. But I think the magic is, what happens when a Jayesh or Prantik lands on the website, whether paid or otherwise. So how do you sort of take them through that customer journey? How do you progressively capture, or do some audience profiling, right? How do you do personalization? How do you take them through that journey before they sort of become a customer? And then thereafter, if you've got the customer base, how do you drive organic repeat sales? How do you drive loyalty? Because I think the industry narrative, it's still very much advertising paid click driven, understandably, because that's where the big boys are playing. But I think the third bucket that I would say is, which is really underserved, is organic content marketing, SEO, email marketing, marketing automation, and then customer journey and loyalty. Because I think all of that ultimately helps them measure the efficacy of the campaign or the brand objectives in terms of CAC to LTV, right? At the end of the day, someone somewhere down the road is going to say, hey, if I'm going to be spending $1 million, where should I spend it? What sort of ROI do I get? So in summary, it's the brand message to sort of break out of the clutter through differentiation and positioning. It's the marketing effectiveness in terms of measuring the right KPIs at the right phases. And lastly, looking at the organic and below the line activities, which I think are really underserved.
So it's interesting that there is still so much room for improvement on SEO, which is where performance advertising really started to some extent, and then email, right? Especially in markets like Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific. You mentioned the point, once they land onto the website, how do you personalize the journey? How do you use maybe even data and analytics, right? So what would be your take on the maturity of the industry on first party data, on using data-driven personalization and all the tooling which you mentioned around that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty immature. I would probably give it a 2 on 10 if I had to rate. The marketers, are generally trained or incentivized so much on above the line visibility. If you talk to any marketer, they would still say their holy grail is Cannes, an award at Cannes, or any of these, the spikes, etc., etc. Now, nothing wrong with it, but I think the industry over indexes on uh, one big creative idea, or the visibility of an emotional tear-jerking ad or creative that you may see. But I think there are very few opportunities or platforms that celebrate that. Hey, did that tear-jerking ad really sell more insurance policies in that particular industry? Or did that ad sell more cans of beer? Maybe it did. It is just that the biggest challenge of the industry is you just don't know which part of your ad spend is working. And I really hope that changes because the tools and the platforms are there. It is not prioritized because of lack of incentives or lack of visibility. Uh, but I think I'm beginning to see a change in Singapore. But when you look at Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific, maybe Singapore, Australia, I would still say there is a bit more push from the top management in terms of changing incentives, changing roles. I think you are seeing avenues where it's no more CMOs and silos in many companies. The objective that I'm seeing in some of these companies is whether you call it CDO, whether you call it CTO, but the idea is, hey, are we mashing marketing with the right technology? And are we sort of aligning with the right financial goals that the CEO or the board is probably sort of championing? If that is not happening, we wouldn't drive better maturity. So, very lots of gaps. Even in when we say digital, it's really all that's happening right now is instead of TV, radio, that's coming to Google, Facebook, or programmatic. But it's ultimately ads. But very few people are talking about the plumbing and the program, the tooling behind the scenes to drive personalization at scale.
Yeah, I mean the word plumbing is doesn't sound sexy enough, right? So maybe
Yeah.
that's one reason. You also said people over-index on that big creative, but people also over-index on the big tech, right? TikTok, Google, Facebook, even on the media spend, capture a disproportionate amount of dollars in APAC. I think it's closer to 78%, whereas US is around 56%. So is that also a maturity problem or is it a risk appetite problem?
Yeah, it's probably both. We've had a lot of success working with the likes of Facebook, Google, and TikTok as well. I think they are a very large marketing machinery themselves. Sometimes it's a visibility problem. Everyone's doing big tech advertising, so I can't risk not doing it. And it's well, for whatever it's worth, it gives me the large reach. Obviously, the big challenge that these wall gardens are not audited. So, you're sort of relying on their data, and every 2, 3 years, I think it's public information that they themselves come out and say some data points were erroneous. So that's a big, obviously, big gap. But on the other side, on the supply side of programmatic, very honestly, I haven't seen uh, a very large sort of revolution or movement on the publisher side. In Southeast Asia, I don't see a great publisher network, which sort of gives me A, the audience reach, B, the tech and tooling to sort of incentivize me to move my spends to those. I mean, and I don't see that changing in the next 4, 5 years. In fact, if I were to put my money, I would only see my ad dollar spends go deeper into the Meta and Alphabet networks. I think I personally am quite a big fan of the way Meta is moving towards the whole WhatsApp economy. I mean, prior to me leaving Merkle, we saw some great implementation work with large hotel groups where they're completely moving, including their hotel websites, to their booking, to customer service, everything within the WhatsApp ecosystem. And in markets like India, where you can even pay, that adds an additional layer. Good or bad, I see the big tech networks only strengthening.
The reality is that if the big tech delivers the ROI and it delivers the reach, absolutely no harm working with them. So you mentioned the top three challenges, and now with the advent of AI, where you would have seen it both as a marketeer as well as your other work on the entrepreneurship side, what do you think will change in the next 2 years?
Yeah, a lot should change. I think I must say, after having spent 15 years in the industry, that it's still quite a very labor intensive and very inefficient industry currently. If you look at the public markets and if you look at the stock price, all the big agency groups, are very much measured on operating profit margin. The multiples are not multiples of revenue. So clearly, there isn't much growth happening, and that's primarily because of two things, I think, which is where the opportunity for AI is. I think, if you look at any agency group, there are broadly three buckets. There is the creative side of the agency, there's the media side of the agency, and then there is the customer experience or data analytics. And I think the creative part is still so much over indexed on that one big idea from a chief creative officer. Now, nothing wrong on one big idea, but you can't win the brand battle with one big idea alone. So I think the one first opportunity I see is AI enabled ideation. I've started seeing tools where if just by entering the website of your of the client or certain other brand guidelines that you may have, these tools are able to sort of give you multiple versions of briefs vis-a-vis competition in markets that you can share with agencies. So I think there's a bit of intelligence that can come in sort of really cracking the question of what is my brand all about, what is my competition mapping, how should I position and differentiate. I think that is where I would love to see generative AI or generalized AI sort of come into the picture. And then, of course, creative optimization. That's the second bit on the creative side. Is today when I'm running ad campaigns on Google and Facebook, and after a while there's a creative fatigue and the click-through rates go down. What I would love to see is automation there, that the Google and Facebook platforms, they themselves create multiple versions that automatically kick in before fatigue sets in, so that your click-through rates don't really go through a major dip. I think needs to completely be overhauled, because today, if you look at the big agency groups, bulk of them make most of their money through media agency fees, rebates, what have you. And I think that is where there's a lot of inefficiency, and that's where there are upstarts that can sort of disrupt that. Media planning, I don't think, till date, we do a lot of random Excel sheet driven media planning, which is, I think, archaic and pointless, right? It is, you tell the client what you want to sell them based on what incentives you have that you get based on, which publisher you work with, but as opposed to what channels the customer should be sort of looking at. And it should be optimized on the fly, right? So there should be zero-based budgeting for clients where AI tells the client saying, hey, if that's your brand brief, I think you should spend 40% on programmatic on these 89 sites and the rest 60% across 3 big tech platforms on these specific products, right? I think that should and can easily be automated. The third piece is on the personalization of the journey. I think I'm seeing a lot of work happen there in the West, but I think mapping the customer journey in an automated fashion, understanding the different touch points, figuring out the right copywriting for each sort of touch point to drive. I think, it might sound futuristic, but in the next decade, I hope there is an automated agency play somewhere that, yes, you will need human operators. If you look at the margins that agencies make today, I think hopefully there's an agency, whether it's a big group or more likely it's going to be one of the new upstarts, where they're going to be driving much higher margins with automation across all three.
Yeah, so it's fascinating how you have described the AI or Gen AI driven workflow of a new agency, right? I mean, almost taking different aspects and automating it, and which is what Gen AI or AI and automation tools should do. But it always seems like in this industry, there is that tension or a bit of friction for agencies to do it themselves because it affects their margins, and the upstarts are not, strong enough to make that change. And that's one angle. And there's also the larger consulting firms which have bought media agencies, creative agencies, and they probably understand AI more natively than say an agency would. So do you see this, upstart versus agency versus consulting firms? How do you feel that AI would probably give a bit of advantage to consulting firms versus the agency? How do you see this whole dynamic?
I would put my money on the consulting firms, followed by certain venture-backed upstarts, simply because I think, at the end of the day, as you rightly said, it boils down to vision, risk appetite, and how big is your war chest. And if you look at the big consulting firms, their war chest is pretty deep. Also, I think they don't necessarily tackle it as a marketing or an advertising problem. And I think that's the beauty. It's a philosophical difference, but they're at the end of the time trying to say, what's the business problem that I'm trying to crack? Going back to that example, right? If I'm working with an insurance company, I want to drive better personalization across the business. I want to digitize the business. I want to drive better conversions and better loyalty, right? So I think fundamentally advertising as a industry, I think that market size or that domain itself needs to sort of expand. And there are a lot of challenges with that because I think, like I said, the agency's world celebrates those awards. I think what I've seen is the efficiency as well as this desire to sort of over-index on the big idea, celebrate that big creative win, sell as not sort of focus on massive capex investments for the future, right? But on the consulting side, they are basically working not just with the CMO, they're working with the board. You look at the BCG, McKinsey, Accenture's, KPMG's, EY, they are saying, you know what, it's very simple. If you just speak to the two leaders of the two different worlds of the organization, you will automatically look at, hey, what's your typical average deal size? From my recent chats with a couple, I recently had a good opportunity to chat with a CEO of an ad agency, of a pretty large ad agency, and someone, a senior partner at a very large, one of those big four consulting firms. And the average deal size value is about 10x. So there is a difference in ambition. There is a difference in a definition of what digital and digitization means. That's where a big difference is. And that then gets fueled by the big pockets that the consulting firms have. The advertising world only looks at the advertising dollar pocket, which I'm afraid is not very large, even though there's $1 trillion. But you can imagine the digitization and the business transformation space is much larger, right? So I would sort of see, and I'm already seeing the big consulting firms invest a lot of capex dollars on R&D. The other thing that you look at the balance sheet, or income statement of a company is, hey, are you sort of spending money on the future? And I don't think the agencies really are. But I do see the consulting firms spend money on R&D, on IP development. So those are, again, very healthy indicators, right? Where I've seen the agencies take a few steps, a couple of them have signed agreements or partnership agreements with the likes of NVIDIA, etc. Disruption is such a thing that nothing gets disrupted till it does, right? So I think the upstart element will come. It may not be, you will need one or two very big upstarts, very well backed, to sort of say, you know what, I'm going to completely disrupt media planning and optimization.
Great. When you talk about the media industry, especially in our part of the world, it's difficult not to talk about TikTok and TikTok Shop and what the impact that it has had. And we know that retail media itself is it's already $100 billion plus industry worldwide, and it's going to be 200 billion very soon. And TikTok Shop is probably the strong player in this part of the world. So how do you see retail media shaping up, especially in Southeast Asia, given the dominance of social media influencers and TikTok Shop?
Yeah, I think retail media, it's a big buzzword, but in the region, again, going back to the discussion of maturity, I just don't see much movement yet. Whether it's the Alpha Marts and, you have the other retail networks, the brands, but, there is lack of talent, capability, awareness for many of these retail client side to sort of invest. I think there's still a lot of reliance on your Facebook, Google, TikTok saying, hey, why should I build my network? We've done some work with the trade desk for Fair Price. Yes, there are some initial pilot projects, etc. But honestly, I think the big tech networks are far more nimble. They have the capability. So I don't see the retail media movement genuinely taking up. I mean, I've again seen in India with the likes of Flipkart, etc. Yes, but in this part, Southeast Asia, I'm not too bullish yet. Again, simply because, economically, I have options like a TikTok Shop, or I have options with the big tech, right? And I would sort of, barring regulatory challenges, which obviously TikTok, by now has faced, it's probably very, very well machined to sort of fight back any of those. It's a great solution. I can't yet see too many Southeast Asia retail brands or corporate clients investing enough. Again, going back, right, it would need a lot of tech and tooling, but I don't see that movement yet.
Yeah, we see a lot of action in Australia, but not in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Completely right. You mentioned when about the programmatic ecosystem not having a large enough scale or big network effect. But there are also a lot of publishers, right? There are OTT publishers. There are people investing in streaming in this part of the world. There is a lot of good news and entertainment content out there. So if you were a publisher, obviously, who wants to stretch, and anyway, there are local media companies in every market. So what would you tell them to kind of make sure that they also get a fair share of the pie, of the advertising pie, right?
Yeah, probably two things. One is I think there needs to be some sort of either consolidation to sort of for the publishers to band together. Either someone needs to sort of make a roll-up play, or they have some sort of an alliance where one increases the access pool of first-party data and audience. And secondly, there is scale for them to sort of implement more layers of ad tech and martech. You have the first-party data, but how do you sort of leverage and orchestrate that? So again, that element of consolidation to drive scale, both for reach, secondly for sort of developing better ad tech tools, if you will, so that customers themselves, they need to find a good economic reason to say, okay, I'm going to shift $10 from Facebook to this larger network, right? And third is taking risks in your business model. Now I've seen that, with MediaCorp, for example, when a Paris sort of moved there, one of the things sort of started doing is going to customers saying, hey, don't just advertise on my MediaCorp network, but you know what, Mr. E-commerce, let's find a way where I can help you sell your products, right? Let's do a 11/11 campaign across offline, online activation, and let's work towards actual outcomes, right? So I think these are three things: banding for scale, coming together with integrated ad tech sort of infrastructure, which clients can sort of leverage, because they definitely can provide better options than wall gardens, which I don't think will open up the wall gardens.
Wonderful. You started the podcast by talking about everything is performance, right? In the Pinstorm world. And there's now been a kind of a revival of brand oriented thinking in the industry, talking about attention. And I see, heavy performance advertisers like Expedia now again going up the emotional journey of travel rather than talking about the offer, right? So where do you see the equilibrium now between brand versus performance marketing? And there's also a tendency to put a QR code in a TV ad now and make it performance oriented. So where do you see the pendulum swinging?
Depending on the company I was in or the client I was talking to, my pendulum swang depending on what I sort of had to sell for the day. I don't think it's an either or question. If I have to still, put my dollar, I would still over-index slightly more on the brand, because I genuinely believe that there's a financial goodwill value on the accounting books for a brand. A brand has a long-term play. If you look at all the successful companies, be it a Nike, be it even the Expedia, etc., I think at the end of the day, brand salience has a huge impact in the long term. Every time there's a new player in the industry, obviously they'll be over-indexing on offers, because especially the venture-backed startups, because they have the money to spend. But I would really say, and brand performance is one tool to build the brand. You got to crystallize the definition of your brand by deliberate thinking. You got to build it internally first with your employees and partners. And obviously you got to advertise and market that externally through performance and what have you. But you've also, the customer service team has to live the brand. The account managers have to live the brand on a day basis. So brand is a very long-term journey. Performance ads or advertisement as a whole can help build your brand, or not for that matter. But I think I would still, if I am the CEO of a company, I would sort of still want to spend more time and money on building my corporate brand and my sort of product brand architecture, put more deliberate thought into it, because that has a huge impact if I'm a public listed company on my stock price, if I'm a private company on my fundraise, on my exit value. having sold a company, I've myself seen the economic value of a brand. Happy Marketer was not necessarily the largest independent agency, but I can now, when I look back and look at data from investors, I think our exit value was, I would say, fairly decent and above par. And I think it had a lot to do with the way we built the brand. I think I would put a higher premium on building a brand and not just on tactical ad campaigns. So maybe 70% brand, 30 performance.
So you mentioned the exit value of Happy Marketeer, and I'm sure you're working with a lot of entrepreneurs. And many entrepreneurs are now looking at Gen AI, right? And given what you said about the advertising value chain getting impacted by Gen AI or AI, and whatever you're seeing as in your work with on the entrepreneurship side, what would your advice be to anybody who is starting out with a Gen AI or an AI-based proposition for advertising, or that upstart that you're betting on? What should they do?
If I look at the marketing martech space, there's still a lot of opportunity. Firstly, my advice is, look, you don't have to jump on the Gen AI bandwagon. I think just if you really want to create a venture, I think in the marketing space, there's a lot of automation that can happen, and there is enough room for new upstarts to come and disrupt specific problems that do not need Gen AI, right? So I think that's the first point. Secondly, I think if one is entering the Gen AI space, also depends on where you're building. Like in this part of the world, Southeast Asia, where you're unlikely to raise a 50 million seed round, or unlikely to get like a massive seed round, I don't think you should really chase a problem at the LLM design layer, right? Or the LLM architecture layer. I think in this part of the world, in Asia Pacific in general, I think it's the application user layer that I would be more interested in. I think there are startups in Western Europe and America that are looking at large language models specifically for marketing. I think there is a play there, but that needs a lot of capital, right? So you've got to be mindful of the nuance of where you're building and in what era are you building. But I think the application layer, if you are building for it, think of the user, because I think a lot of the marketers that I see are oblivious, rightfully so, to the LLM architecture layer, right? You need to start really asking, hey, marketer, what are the 18 things you do in a day? Where can I automate, right? So I think, again, what I'm trying to get at is the user experience layer is very, very critical, and clarity on what problem you're solving. Is it the brief? Is it the media optimization? Is it reporting? I would sort of index on the application layer. I think there are enough and more good LLMs that you can sort of abstract. And maybe your applications can sort of figure out that, hey, for problem A, you need LLM B. For problem B, you need LLM C, right? So I would sort of focus on that. The third thing is, I think, what is sort of being termed as super agents. Can you create tools where the tools themselves talk to each other, right? Now, this may sound futuristic, but when I sort of visited the MIT Media Lab, this is actually quite real in the labs and with some early stage startups there, where I saw a startup which is doing digital advertising reporting, where there is a direct API connection with your big tech ads, your programmatics, and the different AI apps are talking to each other. And that's what's defined as super agents, where there is not much human intervention, right? So there is some good voice or text prompt layer, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of conversations between the AI agents, which is, again, driving further automation and efficiency. Don't fall for Gen AI just for the sake of it. Be very careful when you define whether it's AI powered or is it machine learning powered, because there's a lot of flaff in the industry right now. Everyone wants to be known as an AI powered, but if it is AI powered, so be it. If it is not, it's fine. Big agencies in a market like Singapore have 40 to 50 people in their financial ops team, right? You could automate that layer, right? That's a massive headcount in markets like Singapore. Billing, coordinating with all the big tech to sort of ensure the IOs are rightly sort of built. It goes to the client, cash collection, right? So these are enterprise grade tools which honestly don't need much AI. You could have certain layers. So again, don't fall for that trap. Look where you're building for. If it's in this part of the world, I think focus on the user problem, on the UX, go for specific client side problems and not just agency side problems. And also, right, like I said, like the consulting firms, don't just be myopic and look at advertising and marketing as defined by today. Look at the customer journey. Maybe there's a lot of work to be done on the omni-channel part of the world where there's a lot of noise, but I don't think there's much work that we see, right? And lastly, again, I'm biased. I've only built a services business, but in the economy we are in, build a business where I've always believed the best source of funding is client revenue. So even if you're raising, angel VC money, find a path to profitability as quickly as you can.
Wonderful insights, Prantik. I really hope that the super agents can break some of the silos which exist, right? They could talk when people don't actually talk to each other sometimes to discuss the same problem. But with that, I think we've come to the end of the podcast. Really appreciate all your inputs. Thanks for your time, and really wish you all the best and success in your new endeavors in the post advertising era of your career, I hope, or maybe you'll come back to advertising in some shape or form. So thanks so much for your time.
No, thanks, Jayesh. I think the skill sets of brand building, marketing, advertising are very powerful, no matter which industry you are in. So I think that part will remain in me. And yeah, hopefully there is something I can sort of do to give back and contribute to the industry that's given me so much. And kudos to you for sort of championing this cause, and wish you all the best for this podcast and the good work you're doing.
Thanks a lot.